Poor black single mom texted a Korean mafia boss by mistake, asking for co-parenting, and this happened. All right, pull your chair closer to the fire, because chapter 1, that one deserves to breathe, to stretch its legs, to really hurt a little before anything else begins. You ever notice how life-changing mistakes never feel important when you're making them? They don't come with thunder, no warning drums, no whisper in your ear saying, "Careful now, this one will cost you." No, they come quietly, like a tired woman holding a cracked phone, trying not to cry too loudly so her child won't wake up. That woman was Nia Okafor. And that night, Lagos was doing what Lagos does best, refusing to sleep. Generators hummed like stubborn bees. Somewhere down the street, a woman argued over the price of pepper like it was a matter of national security. Danfo buses honked like they were offended by existence itself. But inside Nia's one-room apartment, silence. Heavy, tight, suffocating silence. The kind that sits on your chest and asks, "So, what's the plan now?" Nia sat on the edge of her mattress, shoulders slumped, hair tied in a scarf that had seen better days. Her son, little Malik, slept beside her, his tiny chest rising and falling like the only steady thing in her world. She looked at him for a long moment. Soft eyes, innocent face. "Your father is a foolish man," she whispered under her breath. Not loud, never loud. Because anger was expensive when you were this tired. She reached for her phone. The screen lit up with a spiderweb of cracks, like it had been through battles she didn't have time to talk about. Her thumb hovered over a number saved months ago. Chinedu. She hadn't called it in weeks, not since the last time he promised, "I'll send money tomorrow." Tomorrow came, tomorrow left, tomorrow blocked her number. Nia scoffed quietly, shaking her head. "Useless promises," she murmured. But tonight wasn't about pride. It was about survival. Diapers were finishing, food was low. And Malik? Malik was growing. Fast, like children do when you're not financially ready for it. She inhaled slowly, steadying herself. "This is not begging," she whispered. "This is responsibility." The words sounded strong. They didn't feel strong. Her fingers moved across the screen, typing fast before courage could run away. "We need to talk about our child. You can't keep ignoring me. Co-parenting is not optional." She paused. Read it again. "Too harsh? Not harsh enough?" She sighed. "Let him be annoyed," she muttered. "At least he will respond." Her thumb hovered over send. And right there, right in that tiny, forgettable second, everything could have changed. If she had double-checked the number, if she had hesitated just a little longer, if Malik had woken up and distracted her. But life doesn't deal in ifs, so she pressed send. The message whooshed away. Gone. Irretrievable. And just like that. A door opened somewhere she could not see. She dropped the phone beside her and leaned back against the wall, closing her eyes. The room was warm. Too warm. The kind of heat that makes patience thin. Minutes passed. Nothing. No reply. "Huh," she scoffed. "Of course," she whispered. "You're ignoring me again." She reached for the phone, ready to toss it aside. Then it buzzed. Her heart jumped. Fast. Sudden. Hopeful in a way she didn't want to admit. She grabbed it quickly, looked at the screen, and frowned. Because the reply was short. Too short. "You have the wrong number." Nia blinked. "Eh?" She sat up straighter, squinting at the message like maybe the words would rearrange themselves into sense. "Wrong number?" She checked the contact. Still saved as Chinedu. Her brows furrowed. "Don't start this nonsense," she muttered, already annoyed. Because in her world, men didn't deny responsibility politely. They denied it creatively. New numbers, excuses, silence. This? This felt like one of those tricks. She sucked her teeth. "Okay. You want to play?" Her fingers started moving again, faster this time, sharper. "Don't start that nonsense again. You think you can just deny your child? I'm tired. We need to figure this out like adults. She hit send with more force than necessary, then crossed her arms, leaning back like she had just delivered a closing argument in court. Let him reply again, she murmured. We'll see. But even as she said it, even as she waited, there was something in the air, something quiet, unseen, because far, far away from her small, struggling world, that message didn't land on a careless man. It landed on a man who didn't make mistakes, a man who didn't ignore messages, a man who didn't get spoken to like that. And as Nia sat there, thinking she was chasing a deadbeat father, she had no idea. She had just knocked on the door of something far more dangerous. And the scariest part? It had already opened. All right. Now the fire is catching properly. Chapter 2? This is where the air changes, where something small becomes something you can't take back. Lean in. Now listen. Power has a sound. It's not loud. It doesn't shout. It hums. Low. Controlled. Dangerous. And on the other side of that message, Nia sent so casually, that hum filled an entire room. High above the city lights of Seoul, inside an office that looked more like a throne room than a workspace, Kang Dae-hyun stood by a glass wall that stretched from floor to ceiling. The city glittered beneath him. Cold, beautiful, untouchable, just like him. Men stood behind him, silent, disciplined, she the kind who didn't speak unless spoken to. Each one dressed sharply, each one carrying the quiet weight of violence under their calm faces. On the table, phones, files, weapons disguised as ordinary things. This was not a place for mistakes. And yet, buzz. The sound sliced through the room like an insult. One of the men glanced up immediately. Another shifted slightly. Because nobody interrupted Kang Dae-hyun without consequence. Dae-hyun didn't turn right away. He simply stared out at the city a second longer, then slowly reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, looked at the screen. And that's when his brow shifted, just barely. Not confusion, not anger. Something quieter. Curiosity. He read the message once, then again. We need to talk about our child. You can't keep ignoring me. Co-parenting is not optional. Silence. Thick, pressurized silence. One of his men finally cleared his throat, carefully. Sir? Dae-hyun didn't answer immediately. Because here's the thing about men like him. They don't react. They analyze. Every word, every intention, every possible threat. A child? One of the men muttered under his breath, before he could stop himself. That earned him a sharp glance from another. Because that question was dangerous. Dae-hyun had no known relationships, no scandals, no loose ends. He was precise with his life, ruthlessly so. So this message, it didn't make sense. And when something doesn't make sense in his world, it usually means one thing. A setup. He tapped the screen once, slowly. The room watched him like men watching a loaded gun. Then, finally, he typed, or short, clean, controlled. You have the wrong number. Send. The message left his phone and disappeared into the night. That should have been the end. In his world, things ended when he decided they should. But life doesn't always respect power, because barely seconds later, buzz. The phone vibrated again. Now that was unusual. One of the men straightened. Another stepped closer to the table. Because whoever was on the other end of that phone clearly didn't understand who they were speaking to. Dae-hyun looked down again, read the reply, and this time, something changed. Don't start that nonsense again. You think you can just deny your child? I'm tired. We need to figure this out like adults. Silence fell so hard it almost made a sound. One of the men actually inhaled sharply. Another looked away completely. Because that message, that tone, that kind of boldness, people had disappeared for less. Slowly, very slowly. Dae-hyun lifted his head. His eyes moved across the room. Not angry. That would have been easier. No. He looked intrigued. Who is this? One of his men asked carefully. Daehyun didn't answer. Instead, he walked toward the table, set the phone down, then picked it up again, like he was weighing it. Trace the number, he said calmly. Immediate movement. Laptops opened, fingers flew across keys. Because when he gave an order, it wasn't a suggestion. Within seconds, foreign number, one man reported. Another added, Africa, Nigeria. Daehyun's gaze flickered. Nigeria. Far. Unconnected. Unlikely. Continue, he said. More typing, more silence. Then, name, Naya Okafor. Pause. Single mother. Another pause. No criminal records. No known affiliations. The room went still again. Because that didn't fit. Not a rival, not a threat, not someone playing games at his level. Just ordinary. And yet, he picked up the phone again, read her message one more time. There was frustration in it, exhaustion, not manipulation, not strategy, just truth. Messy, unfiltered truth. And that was rare. Daehyun sat down slowly, leaning back in his chair. His thumb hovered over the screen. One of his men spoke, cautious. Sir, it's likely just a mistake. Yes, another added quickly. We can block the number. Block it. Delete it. Move on. That's what most people would do. That's what he usually did. But something about the message lingered. Why that rawness, that lack of fear? Nobody spoke to Kang Daehyun like that. Nobody could. And yet, she did. Without even knowing who he was. That thought settled somewhere deep. He exhaled quietly. Then, before anyone could predict it, he typed again. Not long, not emotional, but different. Tell me about the child. Send. The room froze. Because that wasn't procedure. That wasn't strategy. That was interest. And interest, from a man like him, was never harmless. Miles away. In a cramped Lagos apartment filled with heat and worry, Nia's phone buzzed again. She picked it up casually, still annoyed, still ready to argue, still thinking she was dealing with a stubborn, irresponsible man. She read the message. Paused. Tell you about the child? Her brows furrowed. Confusion crept in. Because that wasn't how Chinedu talked. That wasn't his style. He would have deflected, avoided, lied. But this sounded serious, present. Almost like he was listening. Nia hesitated, just for a moment, a small moment, the kind that decides things without asking permission. Then she sighed. Finally, she muttered, and began to type. Not knowing, not even slightly suspecting, that every word she was about to send was going to change both their lives. And just like that, a conversation that shouldn't exist began. Good. Now the story starts tightening its grip. Because Chapter 3? This is where curiosity stops being harmless and starts becoming personal. Lean in. This part moves quieter, deeper. You see, there are two kinds of silence. The first one is empty. Nothing happening, nothing changing. The second is the kind that listens. And that night, two very different worlds sat inside that second kind. Back in Lagos, Nia stared at her phone longer than she wanted to admit. Her fingers hovered above the screen, unmoving. Because something about that reply didn't sit right. Tell me about the child. No jokes, no denial, no irritation, just direct, present. Almost like the person on the other end actually wanted to hear her. She frowned. Since when? She muttered under her breath. Malik shifted beside her, letting out a soft sigh in his sleep. Nia glanced at him, her expression softening instantly. That was all it took. Because when you're a mother, your hesitation doesn't last long when it comes to your child. She adjusted the small blanket over him, then looked back at her phone. Okay, she whispered. You want to listen? Then listen well. Her fingers started moving. Slow at first, then faster, then unstoppable. Somewhere across continents, Kang Dae-hyun sat in a room built for control and waited. Not impatiently, not anxiously. He didn't do either, but he waited. His phone rested in his hand, screen dim, thumb still. Around him, the room had returned to its usual rhythm. Quiet movement, low conversations, orders being carried out. But every now and then, someone would glance at him, because they had noticed. Their boss, who ignored unnecessary things, was holding on to something unnecessary and not letting it go. Buzz. The message came. Dae-hyun's eyes dropped immediately. He opened it, and for the first time that night, he didn't skim. He read. His name is Malik. He's 2 years old. He doesn't sleep properly unless I sing, and I can't even sing well, so I don't know why he likes it. A pause. Dae-hyun's expression didn't change, but something in his focus sharpened. He likes bread too much. If you give him one slice, he will cry for another like his life depends on it. Another pause. One of the men in the room spoke behind him. Dae-hyun didn't hear him. He's stubborn. I don't know where he got that from. A faint shift in Dae-hyun's jaw. Almost like a reaction. Sometimes I get tired. Not small tired, real tired. The kind where your bones feel heavy. But when he smiles at me, it's like my body forgets everything. That line lingered. Longer than the rest. Because it wasn't information. It was truth. Raw, unpolished, unstrategic. And Dae-hyun? He was a man who lived in a world where everything had an angle. Everything had a purpose. Everything had a price. But this was uncalculated. He scrolled further. I'm not asking you for anything crazy, just help, be present, even if it's small, because I can't keep doing this alone. Silence. Deep silence. The kind that presses in from all sides. Dae-hyun lowered the phone slightly, his gaze drifting. Not to the room, not to his men, but somewhere else entirely. Somewhere inward. Because that word, alone, it echoed. Not loudly, but enough. Sir! One of his men stepped forward, hesitant. Should we end communication? Dae-hyun didn't respond immediately. Because here's the thing. He had already confirmed everything. He knew who she was, where she lived, what her life looked like. There was no threat. No hidden agenda. Just a woman, speaking. And somehow, being heard. He looked back at the screen, at her words, at the small pieces of a life so far removed from his own. It almost felt fictional. No power, no protection, no control. Just survival. Day by day, breath by breath. He tapped the screen lightly, scrolled back to the top, read her messages again, slower this time, and something unfamiliar settled in his chest. Not sympathy. He didn't label things like that, but recognition, not of her life, but of the weight in her words. His thumb hovered over the keyboard. Paused. Because responding meant something, continuing meant something, and Kang Dae-hyun did not accidentally involve himself in anything. Across the world, Nia stared at her phone again, waiting. Her earlier confidence had faded just a little, replaced by something quieter. Doubt. Because now that she had said everything, really said it, the silence felt heavier. Maybe I talk too much, she muttered. She rubbed her face with one hand. Maybe he will ignore again. She exhaled slowly, leaning her head back against the wall. This is why you don't open your mouth too much, she whispered to herself. Buzz. Her phone vibrated. Her eyes snapped open. She grabbed it quickly, too quickly, and read. What do you need right now? She froze. Completely. Because that question was dangerous. Not because of what it meant, but because of how it felt. It felt real. Too real. What kind of question is that? She whispered. Her voice came out softer than she expected. Because nobody had asked her that in a long time. Not properly. Not like they were ready to actually hear the answer. Back in Seoul, Dae-hyun set the phone down gently this time, not like a tool, not like an object, but like something that required patience. One of his men finally spoke, unable to hold it in anymore. Sir, with respect, why continue this? Dae-hyun leaned back in his chair, eyes half-lidded, calm, measured, but different. Because, he said quietly, she speaks without fear. The room went still, and far away. Nia stared at that question on her screen, her heart doing something strange, something unfamiliar, something she didn't trust. Because without realizing it, a line had already been crossed, not by action, not by distance, but by attention. And when a man like Kang Dae-hyun starts paying attention, it's no longer curiosity, it's the beginning of something far more dangerous. All right, now we've reached the part where things stop being accidental. Chapter 4. This is where a lie grows legs and starts walking into reality. Lower your voice a little. This one moves close to the heart. You know how some things start as a mistake, then quietly become a habit. Not because you planned it, but because stopping feels harder than continuing. That's what this became. It didn't happen all at once. No. It crept in, night by night, message by message, until one day, Nia woke up and realized something strange. She was expecting him. Back in Lagos, life didn't magically get easier. Bills still waited. The landlord still knocked like he was doing her a favor. Malik still woke up at odd hours, demanding attention like a tiny king with no mercy. But now, there was a small space in her day that felt different. Evening. That quiet moment when the noise softened just enough for thoughts to get louder. That was when she reached for her phone. Not angrily anymore, not ready to fight, just ready. Let me see what excuse you have today, she would mutter sometimes. But there was no real heat behind it anymore. Because the man on the other end, he didn't argue, he didn't disappear, he didn't make promises he couldn't keep. He simply responded. Meanwhile, miles away, in a world that ran on precision and power, Kang Dae-hyun had done something unusual. He adjusted his routine. Not drastically, no one would notice something that obvious. But subtly, intentionally. There was now a moment in his day where everything slowed. Meetings wrapped faster, calls were cut shorter, decisions made quicker. Because somewhere between numbers and negotiations, his mind would drift. To a buzzing phone, to messages that had no strategy, no agenda, just life. Sir, the investors are waiting. Reschedule. Again? A glance, sharp, cold, enough to end the conversation. But even his men had begun to notice, not the reason, just the shift, because their boss, who once treated time like a weapon, was now giving some of it away. That night, like many nights before it, Nia sat by the window, legs tucked under her, phone in hand. Malik was asleep again. The room was quiet, and she was tired. Not the dramatic kind of tired. The real kind. The one that doesn't complain anymore. Her fingers moved slowly this time. Not rushed, not angry, just honest. Today was stressful. Malik refused to eat until I pretended the spoon was an airplane. Imagine me, full-grown adult, flying spoon around like pilot. She paused. A small smile tugged at her lips. If anybody saw me, they would think I've lost my mind. Send. In Seoul, Dae-hyun read the message while seated at a long table, surrounded by men discussing numbers large enough to change lives. He didn't smile. He didn't react outwardly, but his gaze lingered. Airplane, spoon. He pictured it, briefly. A grown woman, exhausted, still finding a way to make a child laugh. It was inefficient, illogical, and yet effective. Sir? A voice pulled him back. He looked up. The room waited. Decision time. He gave one, short, precise. They moved on. But his attention? It returned. He typed, "Did it work?" Back in Lagos, Nia blinked at the reply, then huffed softly. Of course it worked. she murmured, shaking her head. She typed back quickly. Yes. He even laughed like I'm funny. Don't encourage him. He will start expecting daily entertainment. Pause. Then, without thinking too much. Sometimes I wish you were here to see it. Now? That line? That line didn't come from strategy. It slipped out, soft, unprotected, real. And the moment she sent it, Nia froze. Why did I say that? She whispered. Her eyes widened slightly. She stared at the screen like she could pull the words back. But it was already gone, delivered, seen, across the world. That message landed. And this time, it didn't just linger, it settled, deep. Dae-hyun stared at the words longer than he should have. Sometimes I wish you were here. He read it again, slowly, carefully, like there was something hidden between the letters. Not demand, not manipulation, just a quiet admission of loneliness. The room around him faded, not literally, but in the way unimportant things disappear when something catches your full attention. He stood up, walked to the window, looked out at the city again. But this time, he wasn't seeing it, because for a brief moment, his mind was somewhere else. A small room, a tired woman, a child laughing at a flying spoon. Simple, messy, real. And something about that, it pulled. Behind him, one of his men approached carefully. Sir, is there a problem? Dae-hyun didn't turn, didn't hesitate. Prepare a trip. The man blinked. Destination, sir? A pause. Just long enough to matter. Then, Nigeria? Silence. Real silence this time. The kind that makes men exchange looks they shouldn't be exchanging. Because this didn't fit any known pattern. No deal, no conflict, no target. Just a country, a decision. Immediately? The man asked cautiously. Yes. No explanation, none given, none needed. Back in Lagos, Nia was still staring at her last message. Embarrassment crept in slowly. See your mouth, she muttered. Now he will think you are desperate. She groaned softly, covering her face with one hand. Next time, think before you type. Buzz. Her phone vibrated. She peeked through her fingers, then lowered her hand completely, and read. Maybe I should. She blinked. Once, twice. How? Maybe you should what? She whispered it out loud, like saying it might make it make sense. Her heart did a small, confused flip. Because that reply? It didn't sound like a joke. It didn't sound like dismissal. It sounded like possibility. But here's the thing about moments like that. They don't announce themselves. They don't say, this is where everything changes. They just happen. Quietly. Because while Nia sat there, thinking this was still just a conversation, plans were already moving. Flights being arranged. Routes being cleared. Men being prepared. And a man who never moved without reason had just decided to cross continents. All because of a sentence that slipped out without permission. And that's how a lie. A simple, harmless, "So wrong number" lie stopped being a lie and started becoming something real. Now we've reached the moment where stories stop building and start colliding. Chapter 5 isn't quiet. It doesn't creep. It arrives. There's a particular kind of morning that feels off. Not bad, not good, just like the day is holding its breath. That was the kind of morning Lagos gave Nia. The sun hadn't fully settled into the sky yet, but the heat was already making promises it intended to keep. Voices filled the compound early. A woman shouting about water. A radio blaring music that sounded happier than anyone actually felt. Footsteps, doors slamming, life, loud, relentless, unapologetic. Inside her small room, chaos of a different kind. Malik, stop that! Nia lunged just in time to grab a plastic cup before it hit the floor. Too late. Clack. Our water everywhere. She froze, closed her eyes, counted. 1, 2, 3. then opened them again. "You are testing me this morning," she muttered, placing the cup aside. Malik just giggled. Of course he did, because children, they don't understand struggle. They just understand now. She wiped the floor quickly with an old cloth, her movements efficient but tired. Her mind was already running ahead. Food, money, the landlord. Ah, the landlord. As if summoned by stress itself. Bang, bang, bang! Her door rattled. Nia didn't even look surprised. She just sighed. "Coming!" she called out. She adjusted her wrapper, wiped her hands, and opened the door. There he stood, arms folded, expression tight, voice already loaded. "Madam Nia," he began, not even greeting properly. "This rent—" "I know," she cut in, and raising a hand slightly. "I said I will sort it." "When?" he snapped. "Because I will sort it is not money." Nia inhaled slowly. "Not today." "Give me small time," she said, voice controlled. "I'm working on it." He scoffed. "You've been working on it for how long now? This is not Charity House. I said I'm handling it." That came out sharper. He paused, looked at her differently. Because something in her tone said, "Don't push me today." Silence stretched between them. Tight. Uncomfortable. Then he shook his head. "I will come back," he muttered. "Don't make me come back again and hear story." He turned and left. Nia stood there a moment longer, then closed the door gently. Not angrily, just carefully, because anger required energy, and she didn't have enough to waste. Behind her, Malik tugged at her wrapper. "Mama!" She turned immediately, her expression softening like it always did. "I'm here," she said, lifting him up. He rested his head against her shoulder, completely unaware of the weight she carried. Lucky boy. Later that morning, life tried to return to normal. Tried, but something still felt off, like the air was waiting. Outside, the street buzzed like usual, vendors shouting, okadas weaving like they had 9 lives, people moving with purpose, even when they didn't know where they were going. Then, something changed. It wasn't loud at first, just a shift, a slowing, heads turning, conversations pausing mid-sentence. Because into that ordinary street, something very unordinary entered. A black SUV, clean, polished, out of place. It didn't belong to this neighborhood, not even slightly. It moved slowly, deliberately, like it wasn't looking for directions, like it already knew exactly where it was going. People stared. Of course they did, because cars like that didn't come here unless they were lost, or looking for someone. Inside her room, Nia was adjusting Malik's shirt when she heard it. The engine, low, smooth, expensive. She paused, frowned. "Who is that?" she murmured. She moved toward the window, peeking through the curtains slightly. Her brows pulled together. Ah. Because that car did not match her environment. At all. Outside, the SUV came to a stop, right in front of her building. Her stomach dropped slightly. Not fear, not yet, just instinct. The door opened. First, the men stepped out. Sharp suits, straight backs, eyes scanning everything like the world was a threat. That alone was enough to shift the atmosphere. Because those were not ordinary men. They carried themselves like control, like violence wrapped in discipline. Then, he stepped out. Kang Dae-hyun. No announcement, no introduction, just presence. And somehow, that was louder than anything else. Nia blinked, once, twice. Her brain tried to make sense of what her eyes were seeing, failed. Because men like that, they didn't exist in her world, not physically, only in movies, stories, imagination. "No," she whispered, because something inside her already knew. Even before logic caught up, there was a knock, firm, controlled, not like her landlord, not like anyone she knew. Nia hesitated, just for a second. then opened the door. And there he was, standing in front of her. Real, tall, composed. Her eyes that didn't wander. They assessed. Silence. Long. Heavy silence. The kind where time stretches just to watch what happens next. Nia blinked again. Can I help you? Her voice came out cautious, but steady. Because whatever this was, she wasn't going to show fear first. Daehyun looked at her. Not quickly, not casually, but like he was confirming something. Piece by piece. Face. Expression. Presence. Yes. This was her. You asked me to show up, he said calmly. The words landed, but they didn't make sense. Not immediately. Nia frowned. What? Her brain moved fast now. Too fast, trying to connect dots that didn't want to connect. Then, it hit. Her eyes widened, her breath caught, and everything inside her dropped at once. You're not Chinedu. Daehyun shook his head once. No. Silence. Deep. Absolute. He held her gaze, unmoving. I'm the wrong number. And just like that, the truth stepped into the room. Behind him, the street had gone quiet. People were watching, whispering, sensing something they couldn't name. But inside that doorway, it was just the two of them. Two lives that should have never crossed. Two worlds that didn't belong in the same sentence. And yet, there they were. Nia stared at him. At the man she had been complaining to, laughing with, opening up to. Not a struggling father, not a careless man, but something else entirely, something far more dangerous. You came here? She whispered. Daehyun didn't answer immediately. Because the truth? The truth was simple. He hadn't come for answers. He hadn't come for clarity. He came because he wanted to. And that? So that was far more complicated. Outside, the engine of the SUV ticked softly as it cooled. Inside, Malik shifted in Nia's arms, blinking sleepily at the stranger in the doorway. The world didn't stop. But for them, it might as well have. Because from this moment forward, nothing would ever be simple again. Now, this chapter, this is where fear should take chapter 6. Now listen carefully, because this is the part where the story should have broken, where common sense should have stepped in, grabbed Nia by the arm, and said, Run! Run fast. Run far. Don't ask questions. Because a strange man, surrounded by other strange men, had just arrived at your house, in your world, carrying a presence that didn't belong there. Any sensible person would have shut the door, locked it, disappeared. But Nia Okafor? She didn't move. Not at first. She just stood there, holding her child, staring at the man who had crossed continents because of a conversation that wasn't supposed to exist. Her mind was racing now, fast, too fast, pieces clicking into place all at once. The calm replies, the strange questions, the way he listened. You... She started slowly, her voice tightening. You're the one I've been texting? Daehyun nodded once. Yes. Simple, no hesitation, no apology. Nia blinked. Her grip on Malik tightened just slightly. And you knew? She asked. Her tone sharpened. You knew from the beginning that I had the wrong number? A pause, then, yes. Now that one landed. Hard. You mean to tell me, she said, stepping forward slightly, eyes narrowing. Nah, I've been pouring out my life, my problems, to a complete stranger. Her voice rose. And you just sat there and listened? Behind Daehyun, one of his men shifted uncomfortably. Another looked away. Because that tone was dangerous. Not to her. To them. But Daehyun? He didn't flinch, didn't interrupt, didn't defend himself immediately. He simply watched her. Let her speak. You didn't think to stop me? She pressed. I did, he replied calmly. Her brows shot up. Oh, you did? Yes. A beat. But you continued. Silence. Then, so you just said, okay, let me be her therapist? She snapped. That almost pulled something like amusement to the surface in his expression. Almost. I listened, he said. Now that answer? It was too simple, too calm. And somehow, more irritating than anything else. Nia stared at him like she was trying to decide something important, something immediate, something that could go very wrong. Do you know how crazy this is? She asked. Yes. You followed me here. Yes. You don't even know me. I do. That stopped her, just slightly. Her eyes narrowed. What does that mean? Daehyun's gaze didn't shift. I know your name, your situation, your child. A pause. I listened. Now listen. That could have gone very bad, very quickly, because in another story, in another life, that sentence would mean danger, control, threat. And for a brief second, Nia felt it. That flicker, that instinct, that quiet voice saying, "This is not normal." Malik shifted in her arms again, letting out a soft, sleepy sound. Nia instinctively adjusted him, patting his back gently. And just like that, her focus split. Between fear and reality. Because whatever this man was, her child was still hungry sometimes. Her rent was still unpaid. Her life was still very real. She exhaled slowly, then looked back at him. Really looked this time. Not just the suit, not just the presence, but the eyes. They weren't soft. No. But they weren't chaotic either. They were steady, controlled, like a man who knew exactly what he was doing, even if what he was doing didn't make sense. You came all the way here, she said slowly, because of messages? Yes. No hesitation, no added explanation, just truth. And that confused her more than anything else. You're not normal, she muttered under her breath. Behind him, one of his men almost choked, trying not to react. You are correct, Daehyun replied calmly. And for a second, a very small, very unexpected second, Nia laughed. Not because it was funny, not really, but because what else do you do when life stops making sense? You know what? She said, shaking her head. This is madness. She shifted Malik slightly on her hip, then stepped aside from the doorway. Not fully inviting, not fully rejecting, just making space. Since you've already come, she added, her tone quieter now, you might as well explain yourself properly. Now that was the moment, the real one, because that step aside, that small, simple movement, it was permission. Behind Daehyun, his men tensed slightly, because entering meant something, crossing that doorway meant something. He looked at her, measured the moment, then stepped forward, inside, and just like that, the distance between their worlds collapsed. The room was small, smaller than anything he was used to, but clean, organized in the way people organize when they have very little, but take pride in it anyway. His eyes moved once, taking everything in, the bed, the chair, the small table. Then, Malik. The child blinked at him, curious, unaware. Daehyun held that gaze for a brief moment, something unreadable passing through his expression. Nia noticed. Of course she did. That's Malik, she said, her voice softer now. The one you've been hearing about. A pause. Daehyun nodded once. I know. Silence settled again. But this time, it wasn't sharp. It wasn't defensive. It was something else, something still figuring itself out. Then Nia spoke again, quieter, more honest than before. You asked me something, she said. Daehyun looked at her. What I need right now. He didn't interrupt. She hesitated, just for a second, then, I need my life to make sense again. There it was. Not money, not demands, not pressure, just truth. And for the first time since he arrived, Daehyun didn't have an immediate answer. Because that kind of request, it wasn't something he could control. But still, he stayed. And sometimes, that's where everything begins. All right, Now we've reached the fire's last stretch, the part where the story doesn't rush anymore. It settles. Because endings aren't about noise, they're about choice. Now listen, not every love story begins with attraction. Some begin with interruption, with inconvenience, with confusion, with a wrong number that refuses to stay wrong. By the time the sun began to dip that evening, something had already shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically, but in the quiet way that matters most. Dae-hyun didn't leave. That alone was enough to change the air. Because men like him, they don't linger. They don't stay in places that offer them nothing. And yet, he sat in a chair that looked like it might give up under his weight, in a room too small for his world, watching a life that didn't include him, and didn't rush to exit. Nia noticed. Of course she did. "How long are you planning to sit there?" she asked, folding her arms. Not rude, just honest. Dae-hyun looked at her calmly. "I have not decided." She blinked. "You don't decide these things before you travel across the world?" "No." A beat. Then she shook her head. "You're strange. I've been told." And just like that, a small crack formed. Not tension, not fear, something lighter. Malik, meanwhile, had decided that the strange man in the room was worth investigating. Children don't care about power. They don't recognize danger the way adults do. They just observe. He waddled forward slightly, holding on to Nia's wrapper, peeking at Dae-hyun with wide, curious eyes. Nia noticed immediately. "Malik, come back," she said. But the boy didn't. Dae-hyun didn't move either. Didn't reach out. Didn't smile. He simply stayed still. And after a moment, Malik took another step closer, then another, until he stood right in front of him. Silence. Then Malik did something simple, something small, something that meant nothing and everything. He held out his hand. "Now listen carefully." Because that moment mattered more than anything else that had happened. Because Dae-hyun had faced men with weapons, enemies with plans, situations that required precision and control. But this? A child? Offering trust without hesitation? That was unfamiliar territory. He looked down at the small hand, paused, just long enough to feel it. Then, slowly, he reached out. Their hands touched. Soft. Brief. Real. Nia watched the entire thing, her expression shifting in a way she didn't fully understand. Because that man, that controlled, unreadable man, had just handled her child like something fragile. And that stayed with her. Evening settled deeper. The light in the room softened. Shadows stretched along the walls. Dae-hyun eventually stood. He walked toward the window, looked out at a world that didn't recognize him, didn't fear him, didn't bow to him. Behind him, Nia spoke. Quiet this time. "You don't belong here." It wasn't an insult, just truth. He didn't turn. "I know." A pause. Then she added, "And I don't belong in your world either." Now that one landed. Because it wasn't fear speaking, it was clarity. Dae-hyun turned slowly, looked at her, really looked this time. "I did not come to take you there," he said. Nia frowned slightly. "Then why did you come?" Silence. Not empty, not uncertain, just deliberate. Then, "Because you spoke to me like I was human." The room stilled. Nia's expression softened, just a little. Because she understood that, more than she expected to. "I didn't know who you were," she said quietly. "I know." "And if I had known?" Dae-hyun held her gaze. "You would not have said those things." "Exactly." A beat. Then she exhaled. "So what now?" That question hung between them. Heavy, real. Because this was the point where stories usually lie. Promise things they can't keep. Pretend love fixes everything. But this? This wasn't that kind of story. Dae-hyun stepped closer. Not too close. Just enough. "I cannot give you a normal life," he said. No softness, no illusion, just truth. Nia nodded slowly. I know. My world is not safe. I can see that. There are consequences. There are always consequences, she replied quietly. Silence. Then she looked at Malik, then back at him. You already changed things, she added. He frowned slightly. How? You showed up. Simple, but heavy. Do you know how many people say they will come, and don't? She continued. Her voice wasn't bitter, just tired. You came. That was it. That was the difference. Dae-hyun held that in silence, because in his world, showing up was not considered special. It was expected. But here, it meant something else. Nia stepped closer now, just slightly. I'm not asking for perfect, she said. I'm not asking for safe. A pause. But if you stay, it has to be real. That word again. Real. No contracts, no control, no hidden intentions, just presence. Dae-hyun looked at her, at the room, at the child, at the life that made no sense to him. And yet, didn't feel empty. Then, he made a decision, not as a boss, not as a man used to power, but as someone stepping into something unknown. I'll stay, he said. Not loud, not dramatic, but final. And just like that, a story that started with a mistake, ended with a choice. Not perfect, not easy, not predictable, but real. And sometimes, that's the kind of story that lasts the longest. Because in the end, it wasn't about the wrong number. It was about who answered, and who chose not to walk away. Follow for more sweet story on this channel.